Anyway, I want to say thank you for coming, okay? How many of you have come to an event before like this? And how many of you have been following the gubernatorial race overall fairly closely? Okay, it's good, all right. Let me take a step back and tell you a little bit about kind of the campaign, why it's different, and then I'll tell you about myself, obviously, and then we'll just open up to questions and wherever this one goes. You know, I do about 4 or 5 of these a week. Our campaign is different in a bunch of different ways. Let me just start there. I'd like to say there's 3 things that are important and different about my campaign versus the other 5. Is number 1 is that it's about political reform to the entire system here in New Jersey. And I'll talk about that for a moment. It's about policy and substance. So more detail around what I'm going to do to change New Jersey. We'll talk about that. And then, of course, not anticipated, but we're in a moment in time where you have a president that is clearly attacking a lot of the rights that we feel need to be protected, and clear answers and a vision about how we could stand up in this moment beyond just saying we're going to fight Trump and we're going to fight Musk. Here are the actionable steps. And those 3 things are different than anybody else. And hopefully at the end of the conversation today, you say, I can understand why he says that. But we'll put that aside for a second. Every aspect of our campaign has been different. I announced the lieutenant governor early because I think it's important that you have transparency into who will run government. We tell who the attorney general is. I'll talk about that in a little bit. Transparency is important. And we haven't competed in the conventions in the typical way because they're rigged. We're actually building a grassroots structure outside of that. And then finally, we're supporting candidates down ballot. And that's a really important differentiator, which I want to talk about a little bit later. But our campaign is about political reform in many ways. All right, so anyway, let me tell you about myself as a starting point. Is that fair?
Yes.
All right, how'd I get in front of you, right? Like, why am I here? What am I doing? If you told me 20 years ago I'd be in Hamilton in a library basement running for governor, talking to a group of people, I'd tell you it was unlikely because I wasn't registered to vote, and I grew up in a household that wasn't really civically involved, wasn't involved in the electoral process. I come from a family of immigrants. My family immigrated here after World War II. Most of them were in Auschwitz in the gas chambers. Those that survived moved here in order to start their life over again. 35 people in my immediate family were there, taken to the gas chamber, 7 survived, and then they immigrated here. My family settled in Edison, and my dad had a deli in Newark my entire life growing up. I always say I know more about the deli business than any gubernatorial candidate in the history of America. And my mom had an immigration services business directly next door, helping people get immigration. That's what they did professionally. The reason they weren't involved civically or electorally, other than being registered to vote, is similar to a lot of immigrant families. You come to this country and your main objective is just to make sure that you establish your family, your roots here, and you give your kids a better opportunity that you have. They never thought about any of this stuff. So when I grew up, I never thought about it either. I got a job at a very prestigious investment bank after college, the most prestigious investment bank. You can imagine that my parents were obviously very proud. Year 1999, their kid on a good trajectory, going to make a lot of money, going to be self-sufficient, the American dream. Everybody here probably had a 9/11 moment. For me, I was on the trading floor at Goldman Sachs. You could feel the building shake, and it forced me to rethink what I wanted to do with my life. The next day, I went to my managers at Goldman, and I said I was going to leave and enlist in the Marine Corps, and they thought I was crazy. They thought that that's not what people do. I viewed it at the time as really a partial payment for citizenship. I viewed it at the time as my family had a lot to be thankful for, and I just viewed it as a debt owed. I went down to Paris Island. I left Goldman. Went down to Paris Island, spent a couple months down there in boot camp. I wanted to be on the enlisted side, and then subsequently was deployed out to Iraq with the first wave of troops, first to Kuwait, and then what I guess you guys saw as shock and awe on TV, those of you that remember it, we crossed the next day and then gradually up to Baghdad. When I came back, still not registered to vote, still not involved in any of this stuff, very foreign to me. The mayor of Jersey City at the time was a guy by the name of Glenn Cunningham. He was the first African-American mayor in the history of Jersey City and a very popular guy. And he was a Marine. So he thought it was important to recognize a lot of the people that were deployed and came back. So I was among the first deployed, one of the first back, so he invites me to City Hall to give me a city proclamation. First time ever being in a municipal building, invite my parents, family. And after the proclamation ceremony, we spent a little time together in his office, maybe about an hour, and we just got along great. You know, you connect with somebody sometimes and you feel pretty comfortable about that camaraderie and that relationship. He was asking a lot of questions. It felt comfortable. What was it like in Iraq? Why would you leave Goldman Sachs? Did you have a chance to communicate with so-and-so? What was Baghdad? Like questions that a lot of people would ask me. And I never really thought anything of it. I left. I thought it was a good day. That's about it. I was going to go on with my life. I didn't talk to the mayor again 6 months. I'm leaving work, Lower Manhattan. I get a phone call. It's a 201 area code. At that point, I answered unknown numbers. At this point, I never do that, obviously. So I pick it up, and I'm surprised it's the mayor. Okay? And today I have perspective on it because in Jersey City, it's a big city. We have 20 people that do community outreach responsive to community concerns. But I didn't know that at the time. So the mayor calls me, so I'm confused. And I'm like thinking that, why is he calling me? And then I connected the dots that I called about this parking issue a week earlier. So he's calling me about this, obviously. So I said, Mayor, it's really inspiring. You're calling me about the parking issue personally. And he's like, I have no idea what you're talking about, you know? So he says to me, look, I'd like you to come to City Hall to talk to you about something. And I said to him, okay. And we set a time 2 days later after the market closed. And I went to City Hall, and it was my second time in a building like that. I never had any business in a building like that. And we go into his office, and he starts talking a little bit about the political system back then, 20 years ago. Remember the conversation like yesterday. And he starts saying, look, this coming June primary, 20 years ago, he says, Bob Menendez, you've heard of the guy, right? Okay. Bob Menendez, who was our congressman at the time, was going to run a whole slate of candidates. Bob is going to run somebody for Congress himself, then somebody for county clerk, somebody for county surrogate, and these committee seats underneath is what he says. And then Cunningham says, we're going to run a whole slate of candidates. We're going to run somebody for county clerk, somebody for Congress, somebody for county clerk, somebody for county surrogate, and these committee seats underneath. I said, okay, sounds great. I wasn't involved. I wasn't registered. It was so foreign to me. And then he says to me, what I want to tell you, you may have a knee-jerk adverse reaction to. But I want you to think about this for a second. And I'm going to tell you, people that go far in politics have a couple common attributes to their story. I said, okay. He said, they usually start when they're young and they build over time. I said, okay. And he said, they usually lose before they win. And I said, okay. He said, no, it's true. He said, whether you're George Bush or Bill Clinton, these are presidents. They've all lost before they won. It's just kind of generally the way it works. So I said, okay. He said, so I don't want you to say no. I want you to think about this, but I'd like you to run for Congress against Bob Menendez. And I said, yeah, repeat that for me, right? And he says it again. And I said, look, Mayor, I don't know. Let me think about this. I'll get back to you in a couple of days. He said, it's fine. Just call me in a couple of days when you have your mind made up. And I left, and I stood in front of City Hall. And I called my parents. I called some friends. I was standing in front because I was confused. And I told them the story I just told you. I was in the mayor's office. They would say, why were you in the mayor's office? I'd say, that's not even the weird part of the story. And then I got to the next part. And they would all say the same thing to me. They were like, are you sure that's what the mayor said to you? And I'm like, yeah, I'm telling you. So the next day I called him and I said I would do it. I registered that day. And the reason I said I would do it was because I thought at that point, if you knew me then, I was about always, and I still am in many ways, life experiences. You grow with challenges. You put yourself in hardship. Those experiences help you grow as a person. And I thought it was the type of thing that I would tell my grandkids, that I ran for Congress one day. And I never anticipated this kind of door opening, and I would have done that. We campaigned together for 6 months. And those of you that follow New Jersey politics will remember a week before the election, he had a massive heart attack when we were campaigning, and he passed away. And I was on the cover of the New York Times because it was a rare thing that a sitting mayor in one of the 100 largest cities in the country passes away in office. But those 6 months changed my life. Changed my life, similar to the way the Marine Corps changed my life at one point. As we're campaigning, I'm learning this a little bit, and people are coming up to him with all these different issues, local issues and state issues and federal issues. Can you help with this? Can you help with that? And in the small chances that he was able to solve something, you could see what it meant to people. You could see how impactful it was. And what changed with me was I said, you know what, I wanted to do that with my life. I wanted to be a part in some way of public service, and I wanted to put financial service on the side. And that was the light bulb moment spending that time with Glenn Cunningham. The following year, I ran for city council in Jersey City, outside of the establishment. And it's a tough thing to do in Hudson County. And I won a super competitive council race, and that was important to me. And those council races are hard, and I took it very seriously. And the establishment took it seriously. I worked hard, and I did a lot of good things as a council person. And in 2013, I said I'm going to run for mayor, very much like this race that I'm running for governor right now. Very grassroots oriented and very much focused on policy, saying this is what I will do to change Jersey City if you give me the opportunity to do it in detail. When I tell you that the political establishment was against me in 2013, I'm not doing justice to that statement. I'm really not. I mean, of course, you had all of Jersey City against us, the political establishment. You had all of the Hudson County political establishment. You had every statewide person of note. I mean, Cory Booker felt the need to cut a commercial against me. Mayor Bloomberg, who was the mayor of New York City at the time, felt the need to cut a commercial. And it was one of two races in the country that President Obama, then sitting President Obama, felt the need to engage in directly. He got engaged in Rahm Emanuel running for the mayor of Chicago and Jeremiah Healy running for mayor of Jersey City. We won that race, and I'm the first three-term elected mayor in 75 years in that city, okay? And Jersey City is a complicated place. It's the single most diverse city in the country. We have a $750 million budget. We have a lot of challenges. But Jersey City over the last 12 years has been the state leader on every economic metric, every affordable housing metric, every environmental justice metric, every police reform metric. I mean, you name it. The things that Governor Murphy points to often is the things that he's most proud of are things that started in Jersey City and that we did when it was difficult, and he followed us. I mean, paid sick leave. We were the first in the state, sixth in the country. The minimum wage, decriminalization of cannabis. I mean, I could go on. We were the first. 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, I said I was going to run for governor for a couple reasons. Largely because I don't think that the state is on a trajectory that it will remain affordable for my kids. And I say that from a selfish standpoint, the same way that you think about your family and what this place will look like. And I think at the end of the day, we are on a trajectory that is tremendously dangerous to the opportunities to stay in New Jersey the way you believe New Jersey should exist. I believe that. And I think at the core of the problem is that you have a disconnect between how Trenton interacts with municipalities. And I understand that better than anybody because being a mayor is a qualification that I think is so important to being governor. So when I started this, people said, you're starting too early. Why would you start now? How are you going to stay relevant? And I would say the same thing all the time. I would say, I'm starting for two reasons this time. I'm saying the first is because if you're really going to articulate a vision and be substantive on policy on what New Jersey should be and can be, it takes time. You cannot do that overnight. You really want to have a depth conversation around what it should look like. It takes time. So we started rolling out one piece of the platform per month and systematically having a conversation around it. And ours is different than anybody else. You go to the websites, you would see it. I mean, we'd start with transportation. I mean, our transportation plan is 18 pages. It says, this is what I did in Jersey City, this is my track record, this is what I learned, and this is what I know I can do for the state if given the opportunity. Our housing plan is 20 pages. Our environmental plan, we're the only ones with an environmental plan, is 15 pages. Those things are important because as we would roll them out, you'd have 300-400 people on a Zoom call to talk about it. Most campaigns don't do that, and there's a good reason why. Because if I tell you something that you don't like, you're probably going to walk away from me as a voter. So most people don't tell you anything. You ask a question, they'll reiterate the question back to you. They'll tell you, yeah, that's a big challenge that we have here. Here's the background on it. And then they'll tell you something very vague that you'll feel good about. You ask me, example, you would say, what is your policy on education? And then my job would be, yeah, education is a big issue, and everybody should have one. Okay, that's what I just did. You see, but we're not like that. I'm going to tell you, here's what I did, and here's how we're going to change New Jersey, and each part of it. And the second reason we started early was because I wanted to build something that was very grassroots focused, very much outside of those political establishments. Because if we're talking about changing them, you can't be beholden or reliant on them. That's the reality of the situation. And we've built something very big that I think is going to be successful. It's untested, but I think it's going to be successful. So going back to what I started with, these conversations are important to me because if you're showing up for something like this, it means that you care about what the future of New Jersey looks like, and you care about questions, and you want answers around how we're going to change some of things. And I appreciate that. So I want to say again, thank you for coming out. And from this point, we'll just open up to questions wherever you want to go.
Vote for Steve on June 10th. He's working for all of us.